Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Tanya, for organizing this. What I will talk about today is one of the techniques that maybe we could leverage a little bit more, and that is data visualization, and especially how to make data more approachable and have it lead to an action. And I will try to emphasize that through a couple of examples that have been published before, and also something small that I've been doing with the GENIDA data. So coming from this context of the researchers, the usual workflow is forming the hypothesis, then doing experiments, collecting data, doing analysis, and just presenting it out. But what I will really try to talk today, is a little bit more about how we can really leverage this data visualization and use it as a common language to not only focus on the data itself, but actually to focus on who is the audience and what are the actions that this data should make to really get this information through and maybe have a little bit more of an impact. So before we go into that, I actually want to present myself to kind of provide a little bit of a wider context why I'm speaking about data visualization. And that is especially because as many of you researchers here, I also come from a similar field. I studied biochemistry first, and then interested into the physiology and pathophysiology of how neighboring cells communicate with each other. I was then doing a PhD in neuroscience, studying astrocytes through electrophysiology, and really trying to understand the molecular mechanisms of how how the cells communicate through the fusion pore that you can see right there on the top. That was the main topic of my research. I then moved to Uppsala, to Sweden, to do this at the molecular level, to study the regulation of proteins with turf microscopy. And then having all these data of protein screenings, I had the frustration of trying to understand how now to present that. Cell is a complex system. We've seen it before presentation of digital twin. We cannot make a digital twin out of a cell yet. It will take us quite some more time. And then I discovered data visualization. And once I fell into the rabbit hole of it, I became a data visualization designer and researcher here at JSI. So I really wanted to share this path to kind of provide the context of why I'm speaking today, what I'm telling you. So data visualization uses lots of visual metaphors as an aid to communicate it. And I thought this is a really nice one because as researchers can look through the microscope to understand the small world, or through the telescope to understand the stars, we could also use the macroscope of the data visualization to understand the nature of the society as such, and leverage that for the actions that we are doing. So data visualization as such is a science field of visual representation of data, and it consists of a couple of different aspects. I like to call it a craft. So you obviously need to have a data. You need to be aware of what function you want it to be presented, but you also have to be mindful of the design on how you really position that and what you're trying to communicate it with. And there is a sweet spot on when a visualization is really good, that is incorporating all these different aspects just in the right amount. And you can see here a visual representation of the field of data visualization. And this is the same representation, it's just done a little bit with different colors and different fonts. To kind of hopefully catch your attention a little bit better now after lunch that you're all processing. If you compare this with the previous slide, the content is exactly the same, but the experience that you have is different. Talking about design coming from STEM field is something that I might feel a little bit uncomfortable about, where I was mostly putting before emphasis on function and data. But in the end, also as researchers, we need to catch the attention of whoever is reading our papers or whatever we are trying to communicate. So please also consider design when you're creating your visualizations. And through talking about design and really bringing attention to the user, it's a crucial thing to have actually the user so the audience of who you want to communicate your visualization to, really the most crucial part. And I've been showing you now lots of these circular things that look almost all the same, you could say. And I'm doing this intentionally because there are always different solutions on how we can present something. And I know personally for myself that when I was discovering the field of data visualization, I was really frustrated that for me as a researcher, there wouldn't be like one optimal solution, because you as a researcher, you want to be objective, you want to find the best solution to really do something. But there is rather a whole plethora of solutions, so it really depends on the message that we are trying to convey, to find the most appropriate or one of the possible solutions that there are. So how can we do that? We can do that by actually taking one step before we start doing visualizations. So when we have the data, or we have the idea of what we want to communicate, it's really about asking ourselves the questions of like, what is the ultimate goal that we want to achieve with this visualization? Do we even need a visualization? Could it just be, like showing 3 numbers and that is it? It's really like finding this either the information that needs to go through, or the action, or the decision to be made that will really drive that. And then also, who do we want to communicate it to? Who is the audience? What is their literacy rate of data literacy, visual literacy? Are they familiar with heat plots? Are they only more comfortable with bar charts? Or can we explore a little bit further and find some other visual representations that might not be there before, but they really feel they really can go into the context of what we are trying to convey? And that also then includes like, how do we want to communicate it, with what kind of visual elements? And as researchers, we are very often really then have to consider also this aspect that having you being the content expert responsible for all the decisions that we are making, it's a huge responsibility, because sometimes showing a data and then emphasizing one part would bring out a completely different story than emphasizing something else. So this is really a crucial part. And now I want to take us back a little bit into the history and show you 2 examples of, you could call it the mother and the father of data visualization field, that were really good at taking the data visualization as a tool to bring out action. And the first one is Florence Nightingale, which in 1858 she published a story where she created this visualization showing the mortality of the Crimean War. And breaking it down into what's the cause of the mortality. And what you can see with the black here is the actual deaths that happened due to the deaths in the direct combat. But everything that you see in blue is actually due to the deaths that were due to the lack of proper sanitary caretaking. And having these data to really back up her hypothesis, then she was able to advocate for better sanitary regimes in hospital that really led to, that saved lots of lives during the war that they had. And then the second example is Jon Snow, which during a major cholera outbreak in Soho in London created this visualization. So here you can see small coffins. These are small rectangles that you can see here. So he was going around the Broad Street and the neighborhood, and he was collecting how many people died on which of the addresses. And by doing that, then he identified that there was there were really lots of deaths around a pump, a water pump that was there. And having this visualization to really state what's happening, then he was able to negotiate that they removed the handle from this water pump, which then really led to again the decrease in the deaths of people. And then this was also one of the reasons why then they began to understood that this might not be just the bad air that was happening, but it was the microbes that were doing that. So these are two examples with which I really wanted to show you from history how action can be driven through the appropriate ways of data visualization. But what if they actually choose a different, like here is an example from Snow, what if he choose a different way of visualizing the data, if that would be a different perspective? What if instead he would just do a simple line chart or a bar chart that we see here? Or he would use something more modern, scientific visualization of showing the epicenter of the deaths and create the decisions based on that. So which of these ones is really the right way to visualize your data? Considering data only as one perspective, it's really crucial in that sense to understand that there are several different solutions, and that you are presenting just one perspective, and this can be a little bit daunting, but it can also be very important to know. So if we move now fast forward to today, to our context of research papers where we are publishing figures in PDFs, or where we have databases on patient-reported data, and all the other ways we have data and big data and all the data analysis happening. And also where we just had COVID with lots of dashboards that were governing our lives. It's almost like us, we are a little bit insensitized to all the charts that are all around us. And now if we break those charts into actually trying to understand what is their purposes and what type of charts we can actually make, it's I've found this very nice representation from Cedric and Alberto. And we can kind of create a triangle out of them. So first we have these exploratory data visualizations which are linked to the databases in the backend, and they serve as an interface where you can explore the data and find new insights. As Tanya was showing you today, our Rare Disease Observatory could be one of those examples, or more famous ones such as our Vault in Data and several others. Most common ones are, of course, static visualizations, which purpose is to communicate data effectively, and considering that lots of the times these visualizations are seen in the context of media or social media, and the attention span of people is really short. They really need to just have one or two main messages, and those emphasized very rigorously, as you can see here from the Financial Times. One of the most famous visualizations, and also the poverty from our World in Data example. But then there is also a third perspective, and this one is building on top of data humanism, and especially because as people, we have problems grasping large numbers, and they are hard to imagine. for those type of visualization where also maybe you want to emphasize the importance of humans, not showing them just as numbers, but actually emphasizing that these are real humans that we are speaking about, and this is a really good conference to talk about that. For those visualizations, they can really go into direction of emotion a little bit out of the just the regular reasonal perspective, and those can go in the direction. Those are very commonly used in the direction of climate change. You've probably seen the Ed Hawkins climate stripes, or also to commemorate human loss, as you can see here, an example from Federica Fragapane, where instead of just showing bars for people, she used a visual metaphor of hair for protests in Iran. Going now a little bit more into direction of patients and patient data. I want to show you two examples of these ideas, how we can really shift now the approach from showing very objective, if you want, or sometimes boring presentations, maybe into something a little bit more approachable for the end users to really empower them. And first example that you can see here on the screen is something that we can all relate to. It's blood tests. And the typical outputs that we receive after we give blood is something similar to what you see on the screen, just lots of numbers there and some ranges, and then you really have to go there and see, okay, so where am I? Is this where I should be? Misha, she did a really nice example of how if there's a possibility to do this in a more intuitive way, actually without showing the numbers. So to do that, she actually color-coded the results and made the decisions deriving out of them approachable to everyone. So this is like a small exercise that she did, and it's a really good example of how something can be make much more intuitive for people to understand. And then another example I want to show you is the JENIDA exploration that I did as a preliminary side project. Pauline has just showed you how amazing the JENIDA database is on collecting the patient-reported outcomes and how that is crucial for the research. And they were kind enough to share the data with us. So I started to experiment a little bit how this could be made more approachable. I will show a little bit now on how you can do this with data visualization, and then Eric after me will show how you can use large language models to also extract some findings that can facilitate discovery. So what I've did is I really tried to store this information that there is on a little bit of a different cognitive levels. So I tried to have this first large overview and then an option for whoever is interested to go and explore the data a little bit further by clicking and exploring what they are interested in, either directly by interacting with the chart or by choosing the topic that they want to explore. And then there is obviously much more data to be collected for each of the problems that describe what is the severity or how they can be treated. And to develop an overview, I'm developing this kind of a system where you can go and again explore gradually each of the problems and the accompanied data. And this is obviously work in progress, but I just wanted to share it here as an example of how leveraging the exploratory visualization tools can in later stages connect all these databases that we have with the actual users and really empower the audience to find findings that they are relevant for them. Because the main advantage is that having exploratory tools, they are just tools that will equip people so that they can go and make their own findings. And you're not serving something, you're just giving this as a way for them to go and explore. With that, I would kind of like to now just sum it up a little bit. We have here lots of interdisciplinary research, and for the cross-domain communication, there is always a need for a common language, and having a common language of how we can have data as a tool to drive insight is maybe a nice way to do that. And to achieve that, there is really this need for shifting the focus to the end user of the data and what we are presenting. As it's natural to have patients in mind when we are doing when you're doing clinical research, it also should be natural to actually have the consumer of our research of the data in mind when we are deciding what visual forms we want to present our data in. And as Alberto Cairo has, he's one of the leaders in the data visualization field, has said it, that the purpose is really to help people make sense of the world through a combination of visuals and words. And I invite you to ask yourself these questions more often, or contact me if you want to do something together. Thank you.